I found in the tape library a set of 4 tapes on women in leadership. I was so shocked. And I came back in a few days and the tapes were gone. Nobody had seen the tapes. They had disappeared. So, well, if it's important enough to hide, it's probably important enough for me to really push it. And that's when the journey of what is God saying about women and women's leadership, what's God saying to me? As a result of that journey, I knew I'd been called. I knew I'd been called not in spite of myself, but because of myself, because of who I am. And I became a huge advocate for women's leadership.
Hey friends, well, welcome back to the Life and Leadership Podcast, and I'm so glad that you're here today. Now, these season 2 conversations have been so awesome, and if this podcast is helping you to grow, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with a friend so that we can see more and more people growing in their leadership capacity. It really helps when you do that. Well, today on the podcast, we're welcoming Coleman. Kate is the founding director of Next Leadership. Now, that might sound familiar because in season 1, we had Coleman, who is the co-director of Next Leadership with us. Now, these ladies are best friends, which makes sense because they're both incredible. Now, Kate is a former president of the UK Baptist Union and a former chair of the UK Evangelical Alliance Council. She was the first Black woman Baptist minister in the UK and has been recognised as one of the top 25 women racial justice champions in Britain and Ireland, as well as one of the 20 most influential Black Christian women leaders in the UK. So you know already that she's awesome. Kate's new book, Transforming Your Life and Leadership, is out in November. And friends, this book is so powerful. I was able to read an early copy and I actually wrote the foreword. I loved it so much. And so I promise you're going to want to get this book. Okay, Kate, I'm fired up. I'm talking to someone in the motherland.
That's fantastic.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm just so pumped. I hope my Aussie accent is okay for you.
You know what? It's perfect. It's so good. And I hope that my British accent is good for you too.
Mate, it just sounds posh. You just sound so dignified and posh. Anyway, I've been busting for you to come on the Life and Leadership Podcast because you're like one of my heroes. And there's so many things I want to say, such a short amount of time, so I don't even know where to start. I just finished writing the foreword for your brand new book that's coming out called Metamorphing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's how much I love you. I don't write forewords for everyone, so I'm just so passionate about that. But maybe I would love you just to talk a little bit about your own leadership journey, because you're in such a unique place. And I want to know, how does a chick end up where you are?
Well, that is actually an incredibly long story, so I'm going to try and make it short.
Yeah.
And the shortest answer is Jesus, because I was not expecting this. I know your journeys, you have a similar journey. I was not expecting it. I went off to university, Southampton. I was trying to avoid religious people. I got caught in the first, it was like 2 months. God just apprehended me, got hold of me. I went through that sort of 3-year journey at university, really just rooting down in Jesus. I came out, I had some great ideas about what I wanted to do with my life and how I could really serve God. You know how it is, Lord, this is the way I can serve you. And God was not sharing that stuff. So, every door slammed in my face. All the things I had wanted to do, it closed. I went back to London because I'd been in Southampton, which is the south coast in the UK, and spent the next sort of 2 to 3 months, just praying, Lord, what is it that you want me to do with my life? I was a little bit upset with God. I have to confess that, because I thought I could really change the world on my terms. But God had to get me to that place where I was ready to do whatever he was asking me to do. So I was praying this prayer, and I kept getting this word from that was based on Mark 9, verse 2, which was, come up by yourself. It's where Jesus speaks to the disciples. Come up by yourself to a mountain and I'll show you. And so the way I thought is, were there mountains in the UK? So, so, and, seriously, Christine, it was like 2, 3 days later, I was walking on London Underground, which is like a subway
Yeah.
in the US. And I stood on a platform and there was this huge poster in front of me, big mountain on it. And over the top, it said, "Visit Scotland." And I said, "Okay, Lord, that's what I'll do." So I went to Scotland for 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, it was 3 weeks. 2 of those weeks I spent in prayer and fasting,
Wow.
saying, "Lord, what is it you want me to do with my life?" And what was coming back was leadership, 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 ministry, leadership, shepherd my sheep, lead. But I had a huge problem. I had 2 huge problems. The first one was I didn't believe in women in leadership. The first one was that my church didn't, and the second one was that I didn't. And so I was kind of like, what is this? So I came down off the mountain and I said to the Lord, if this is you, you'll have to do this because I can't even see how this is going to happen. I got back to London. I told 2 of my younger sisters and I said, this is what I got when I was up there on the mountain. And they went to the same church. So they were kind of like, we can't see how that's going to happen, but we'll pray for you. Anyway, within a year of that, I was leading that church. And
Wow.
there's a whole nightmare of stuff around that. But I was leading that
Wow.
church.
How old were you?
I was 21. So
Wow.
by that measure, I was a very young leader, and which was part of the challenge as well. So
And what had been your degree? What did you study at university?
yeah, my degree was really useful in this. So I studied biochemistry and pharmacology. So my background's in science, and I'd done that really to just to make my father feel better, because he wanted me to be a doctor. There's this huge story about me and my father sitting in the in the office of the head teacher at my secondary school, and she asked me, "So, Kate, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a poet." And my father
Wow.
coughed and cleared his throat and said, "She wants to be a doctor." And he was like, "Oh, okay." So, and it's a bit of it's a bit of a cultural piece as well,
Right.
African thing, doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yes.
So that was a concession to my father. So, okay, I don't really want to be a doctor, but I'll do biochemistry, I'll do pharmacology, and that's what I did.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you were utterly prepared to lead a church at 21
That's
based on
exactly
your
right.
education and training.
That's exactly right. I think that's how God likes it, So,
Totally.
because then you're just reliant on Him, and well, for all kinds of reasons, I was. It was a tough journey in,
Oh yeah.
but
So what happened? I mean, everyone's going to want to know. So then how did you end up here?
well, I got back into London. I was, as I said, I just said to the Lord, "Well, Lord, you're going to have to do this," and um, I went to my church. We had now this is going to age me. We had a tape library, and I know tapes are coming back, but I was there
Come
the
on.
first time round. So we
Me too. Me too.
so we had a tape library, and I found in the tape library a set of 4 tapes on women in leadership. I was so shocked, and I actually mentioned to my pastor. I didn't tell him anything about the mountain and all of that. But I just said, I'm going to listen to these 4 tapes. And he wondered out loud and said, how did they get there? And I said to him, well, I'm going to come back in a few days and I'm going to listen through. And I came back in a few days and the tapes were gone. And I said to my boss,
Wow.
have you seen the tapes? No. I said to the administrator, have you seen the tapes? No. Nobody had seen the tapes. They had disappeared. So my thinking, and that's the worst thing to do with somebody like me. So, my thinking was, well, if it's important enough to hide, it's probably important enough for me to really push in. And that's when the journey of what is God
Wow.
saying about women and women's leadership? What's God saying to me? And as a result of that journey, there were so many divine appointments, so many connections made with amazing people. As a result of that journey, I knew I'd been called. I knew I'd been called not in spite of myself, but because
Beautiful.
of myself, because of who I am. And
Yeah.
I became a huge advocate for women's leadership. Then some stuff happened at the church, and the pastor had to step back. I won't go too much into that. But the people who oversaw our church turned up and, in fact, asked to see all the churches that they oversaw. And so the guy, Tom, he's passed, he's gone on to glory some time ago, but he came and he said that he wants to see all the church. So we all turned up one evening, and he stood on the platform and he said, I'm going to all the churches I oversee. God has spoken to me. I'm here to repent because of my attitude towards women in leadership. God has told me that my attitude has been wrong, and I want to appoint 4 elders in the church, and one of them is Kate. The church went into meltdown, seriously. It was like, and
Wow.
and I was so shocked. I went to him afterwards and I said to him, Tom, I will not be the cause of split in this church. And he looked at me and he said, Kate, I think God's already spoken to you. I didn't say anything. He said, I think God's already spoken to you. And then he said this, and I've never forgotten these words. He said, you don't have the luxury of saying no to God. That's what he said.
Wow.
So I was
Wow.
like, so that was kind of the beginning of the journey. It was a baptism of fire. Obviously, there were people who I thought loved me. I discovered
Yeah.
how badly Christians could behave. Let me put it
Yeah.
like that. And so it took some time to really get into the flow and to really own my calling, my ministry, my leadership. And I had to get out of my own way from time to time too. So,
For sure. So how did you grow and how did you develop then? Because you were so young and inexperienced, sounds like a lot of people in the Bible. But then, today, you lead a leadership training and empowerment organization and you write on leadership. So that's a big journey from sort of, the sciences to what you're doing now. How did that all develop?
yeah, well, we, because of what had happened to the pastor, we were under the umbrella of a large group of churches. Obviously, we had these overseers as well. And we had to make a decision about which group of churches we were kind of going to head with. So we
Right.
started this relationship. I won't say who they are, but with a
Yeah.
very well-known group of churches here in the UK. And we also knew another group of churches that was led by a husband and wife team, and who were, because I was in London, so we really needed people who were urban
Yeah.
church leaders who understood the context. And this other stream did. And the amazing thing was that the guys who had also been appointed elders, the 3 guys and me, said, we think we should go with this other group. And so I started that journey with them.
Wow.
And after a couple of years, I said to one of their key leaders, I'd really like to do your leadership training.
Right.
And you know what? He looked at me and he said, Kate, we would love to have you on it, but I really think you need to take the formal Baptist route. I was so shocked. Seriously. I mean, our church was a Baptist church, but I was really shocked, and it was like, why?
Wow.
but it was that was another tough journey. So I went away, I put it to prayer, and God said, yeah, I want you to do this. So I applied to the Baptist College, Spurgeon's good Baptist name, and I got in, and that was,
Wow.
so I was leading the church and doing the college stuff at the same time. And that was another interesting journey. And I was the first Black woman Baptist minister in the UK, so I didn't know that at the time. So had I known it, I probably would have run quite
Yeah.
fast in the opposite direction. But I didn't know it. So
Were there other women in your course
there
at
were
all?
other women, but not many.
Right.
So we were kind of the first group of women going in. I was the only Black woman, and then there were a few others. So we made friends together. They also
Yeah.
had some challenging times, but
Wow.
I certainly had some challenging times. Yeah.
And was it to do seminary, like a theological degree, or what was
Yes.
it?
Yeah. So I didn't do a degree. I did a series of diplomas, including church planting, because that's where
Wow.
my heart was, to kind of just multiply, to see what God wanted to do in spaces and places that some churches and some church leaders weren't really prepared to head into. So I did a series of diplomas, and then had a divine appointment, another big divine appointment with the guy who was eventually my mentor, who my first mentor, who was at that time, he was the leading Black theologian in the UK, and we happened to meet someplace, and we got talking, and he was saying to me, "So, Kate, what's on your heart? What do you want to do?" And I started talking about, I want to do some research on women and in leadership and um, stuff like that. And he said, "Well, if you're going to do that, maybe you should get a piece of paper." And I said, "I'm really not interested in a piece of paper." And he said, "Let's have a talk about it." So come up to Birmingham and see me.
Wow.
And so I did. And long story short, there's a whole story around that. But long story short, because the college were very reluctant to let me do that,
Right.
and head into that territory, he created space for me at
Wow.
Birmingham University, and he made me write some stuff and told me, "You're going to have to write differently to this. You're going to have to learn another language." But then said, put it through, all the paperwork through, and they accepted me, and they accepted me to do the doctorate. So it was, that was another mind-blowing moment, because, well, I'd never been in that kind of academic setup before, and theology is a whole nother thing.
Yes.
So my goodness me, so we had the Germans, we had we had everything. It was just kind of like, wow, it was another thing altogether. But so that was that part.
Which is, yes, and so much of your writing, I mean, you can tell that you've got all of that academic background, and yet you still write for normal people like me, which is fantastic. But, as you were going through doing your studies and practicing, for the sake of brevity, really, what have you identified as the major barriers that women either come up against or have to overcome in order to lead? Because you train women in every sphere of life, not just in church ministry.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
have a passion for women's leadership in any sphere, any sector,
Yes.
and for women who are both believers and those who are not, but are willing
Yeah.
to engage spiritually and are willing to engage with a Christian ethos. So, I'll do all of that work with them. But
Yeah.
I think some of the biggest issues are, there are the external issues. So they're the stuff that we call glass ceilings, or in the church context, stained glass ceilings.
Yeah.
So they're the cultural issues. They're the institutional issues. They're the structural issues. They're the way women are regarded. So that's all the external stuff we've got going on. But then there's the internal stuff. And, my first book was about that
Yes.
stuff. So, and the internal stuff is the stuff that, we some people call sticky floors. So it's the stuff that really holds us down. And it's actually where we get in our own way. So, in my first book, it was all about these deadly sins, these things that we just keep tripping over. So limiting self-perceptions, this inability sometimes to create the healthy boundaries, knowing when to say no and when to say yes, because sometimes we say no when we should say yes, and we say yes when we should say no, and then we end up in all sorts of trouble. So those are the kinds of issues, and having a really strong personal vision, that pulls us into God's purposes rather than leaving us in a place where we think we're just there to service everything else and everybody else. But understanding that God has a purpose for us as individuals, and as part of families and as part of communities, and that our task is to step into that and to understand that, to grab hold of that. It's these are some of the things that pop up.
So do you think in 2024, in your experience, with all of the advances we've had with the women's movement, women's empowerment, women breaking glass ceilings, do you still think it's an issue?
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. When I started, I thought, okay, we're going to have to do this big push for the next 10, maybe 20 years. I've been in it now for the 30, I've been in it now for a while longer, and I'm finding young women not necessarily facing exactly the same kind of barriers. So finding it easier to get into spaces of leadership, but because the atmosphere is often still the same, because the stuff that's been said about women, the external stuff is still there, the cultural stuff is still there. So, women get into places of leadership, but the places, the institutions and the organizations and the churches are often still really masculine spaces culturally.
Right.
So until the culture shifts and changes, women are kind of bending themselves into weird shapes.
I'm going to have to jump in because people be thinking, okay, what do you mean masculine spaces, masculine culture, especially in this world of gender and where they'd be saying, look, that is finished. We've redefined all of that, but you're saying it still exists. There is such a thing as a masculine culture and okay, tell us what that means.
Yeah, I mean, at the simplest level, let's take preaching a sermon.
Right.
So for many men, if they preach a sermon, the illustrations are very masculine. So it's, football. Oh, we all love football, don't we? Or, and of course some women do, but it's just the language and the expectations, even the style of leadership, the way we are as leaders, that if women do that kind of, oftentimes it doesn't work for them to do it. So, the whole kind of bossy women, the men are the boss, but women are bossy. So it's that kind of thing, it's normal. If a man does it, it's abnormal. If a woman does it, we haven't got used to what women's leadership looks like.
I 100% agree with you. But I'm wanting us to put language around this because I'm like, yes, you and I have both been rare in, I'm 58, so I've been in this, 35 years. And in the early years was the only woman at most tables, the first woman to do almost everything that I've done. And with great intentionality over my whole life, have created pipelines and pathways for women to come through. So there's a lot more there. This is why I love your new book so much, and I want everyone to get it, because I think for the first time I picked up a book and went, okay, we're having the next conversation, which we need to have, because as you and I are sitting here recording now, we've just kind of had another round of, here in America, sort of very public failures of men in leadership places. And for all sorts of reasons, but that's not the conversation I want to have. What I'm saying is, the reason we've seen so many men is because, by and large, it's been mostly men in those positions.
Yeah.
So as we now, more and more women in time are going to be put in those positions. It's not a guarantee that because of our gender, we are not prone to ourselves, whatever it might look like. It may not be the same sins or the same downfalls. And so because of the way I'm wired up, I'm kind of thinking 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if we don't deal with bigger leadership questions, which is what I think Metamorph does. And because, I've been saying for years, sin is genderless. We are as predisposed to it as anybody else. Perhaps it hasn't been up and at the forefront, mostly because we haven't had those seats at those tables where we would garner that much attention. So much of the literature to date is kind of like, okay, women can have a seat at the table. Well, okay, there are a lot of denominations still having those conversations and institutions. But by and large, a lot have also gone past that and gone, okay, help us to get more women at the tables. How are we going to do that? Okay, yes, and we need a lot more of that. But then the next conversation has to be, now that we're sitting here, how are we not going to repeat the same mistakes or a different version of the same mistake? I feel Metamorph sort of addresses, that's why I got so excited. So tell me a little bit about why you wrote, and people are going to want to know sort of the main thesis and what your main thrust in that book is.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you're saying, Christy. So, it is this idea that we're made for transformation, but we often don't get into that space. So the Bible so I talk about, you'll know the Christian metaverse, so the metaverse for Christians is metanoia, repentance, and metamorphosis, transformation. And so the whole idea of metamorph is that we are called to be metamorphs. We are called to be in a process of constant transformation and growth and development. That's what we're called to as believers. That's what we're called to as leaders. But somehow, and sometimes, we skip that part and we enter a kind of performance-oriented leadership. It's all on the surface and it's not coming from the inside out.
I just want to intersperse, but keep going in a minute, because I'm thinking we have spent so many decades, if not centuries, fighting for the right to sit at a table. Yeah. So the point is that you can then think, well, I've arrived, I have that position, I have that title, I have that office, and you stop metamorphing like that. And I'm kind of like, everyone's got to get this, because and I get why. Like, you have fought so hard. And I understand you've had to break through so many ceilings and cultural issues and biases and all the things that we've written a lot about have kept women out. But we don't want to get back into that paradigm where we see it in so many different sectors, where the oppressed become the oppressor, or the ones on the receiving end of toxic bad leadership become that. And so I think your argument in the book is you don't arrive. A position doesn't make you arrive. A corner office doesn't make you arrive. It's the work of the Spirit on the inside of us, right, which is for our whole life.
Absolutely. And it's being open, it's being predisposed, it's being ready, it's being willing, it's embracing the Spirit's work and recognizing that we're not finished on this side of eternity.
Right.
We're not finished. We start the process. We're constantly inviting the Spirit to continue the work of change and transformation, and all the stuff that happens to us, all of the challenges of leadership, all of the opportunities of leadership are opportunities to grow closer to Jesus, grow closer to become more like the people and the leaders he's asking us to be. And that unless we do that, we end up leading in really weird ways. We can become just like everybody else, like everything else. But actually, metamorphosis is at the heart of who we are as believers and the heart of who we are in Christian leadership. And we get to choose whether, that this is one of the wonderful things about Jesus is he doesn't force it. The Holy Spirit doesn't force it. So one of the things I say in the book is that, people think that proximity does it. I go to church, I pray, I read the Bible. That doesn't do it. It's something else. It's this willingness and openness to embrace what the Spirit wants to do. It's not the performing stuff.
So why do you think when we get into high levels of leadership, we could be prone to stop embracing what the Spirit wants to do?
I think we can begin to take ourselves too seriously.
Right.
We can get to a place where we think, oh, it's me. It's me doing this. It's me making this happen. And we can allow people sometimes to put us in that place. What I've got here, and we can forget that actually, this is all about service to God. It's all about service to Jesus, and our permissions come from Him. And we need to be receiving those permissions every day. What is it you want me to do today? How do you want me to be today, Lord? How should I deal with that? How should I address this situation? We're constantly supposed to be calling Him into that and asking Him to change our hearts and our orientation, our disposition, our posture, the way we are in the world, so that we lead out of who He's calling us to be. And
it sounds, I know it sounds beautiful and romantic, because nobody goes in thinking, I'm going into leadership because I want to be toxic, or I want to be racist, or I want to have an affair, or I want to ruin people's lives. Like by and large, I would think 99.9% of the people don't enter with that thought. So how do we end up in those places?
It's this is one of the things that I'm constantly saying to leaders. Actually, we don't go into leadership thinking we're going to trip up and do some terrible thing.
Yeah.
We go into leadership, we want to make lives better. We want to make God's purposes manifest in this world. We want to progress. We want more people to come to know Jesus. We want our organizations and the work our organizations do to really speak something of God. We begin there.
Yes.
But I think we often get caught up in the measures of this world,
Right.
So, it's numbers, or it's, it's gifts, or it's growth, or it's, and we get caught up in all of that stuff. And we forget that the stuff that actually, it's the stuff that stretches us vertically, if you like, it stretches that way towards God, the stuff that matures us. We have to make room for that stuff, for growing past, for recognizing, becoming aware of why did I respond like that? What was that about?
Awesome. Yeah.
And we need.
So you think we lose our curiosity and asking questions?
Yeah. So the first chapter is all about, it's that story of Moses, and how we can, curiosity is something that we need to nurture, not just about the world, but also about ourselves. So becoming, certainly in that first chapter, I talk about those three areas of curiosity. That we've got to come to know. There are things that we know about ourselves that we need to deal with. There are things that other people know about us that we don't know, that we need to open ourselves up to others to help us to deal with. And then there are things that only God knows and nobody else knows, and we don't know anymore because it's almost invisible to us. And to get that, we have to go to God for that. We have to make sure we've created that space for God. So curiosity is a big theme. And each of the chapters deals with a different area. I think chapter 2, talks about dealing with limiting self-perceptions.
Yes.
And in chapter 3, it's about friendship, leveraging friendship, understanding the
I
power
thought
of
that was a
friendship.
powerful chapter because very rarely do you read that. You read a lot about networking and leveraging relationships, but not in the context that you put it in friendship. I thought that was very powerful because it's something that's not talked about enough, I think, in the leadership space. I thought that was great. Sorry, keep going.
No,
Yes.
no, I mean, I love that. And,
Yeah.
I think particularly for church leaders, but I think the further you go in leadership, sometimes you feel that you can't have those friendships, but
Yeah.
actually it's the friendships that help you to stay healthy as a
Yes.
leader, and having that sort of open space and having some of the challenges of friendship as well as the benefits of friendship. So yeah, and then chapter 4, a lot around just leadership and the need for radical empathy.
Yes.
And that's the whole sort of incarnational thing. How do we step into other people's shoes so that we can lead them well? And how do we step into other people's shoes so that we can recognize what the real needs are?
Why do you think we've lost that in leadership? Because to me, that is the heartbeat. That's what defines really a Christian leader more than anything else, because God stepped into incarnation, into our world.
Yeah,
And I would think that our whole job is to step in, of course, to lift people's eyes to Christ and to another world. But why do you think, and especially in light of the last decade of just the craziness on the earth, and it's not going to get any better. So we have to nail this because it's so
absolutely.
important. Um, why do you think that, by and large, if a secular world's looking at a Christian church and Christian church leaders, their first thought is not, "Wow, they're so empathetic." That's not the first thing they're thinking about us. What has happened to the heart of the leader? Big question.
Yeah, I think it's a huge question, but I do feel that some of this stuff is that we've taken most of our leadership lessons from elsewhere. So
Yeah,
the big lesson of the gospel is incarnation, is that Jesus
yeah,
does this impossible, incredible thing, and then asks us, in Philippians 2, to imitate him, to do the same,
yeah,
to lay down power and to step into,
yeah.
so, and he does that, and
Mm.
that's God at work. So, and that's the model for us. But often our models come from elsewhere, and our models are about power over and about bossing, telling people what to do, but that's not the model we find in the Gospels. It's not the model that we find in Scripture. It's not even the model we find in the Old Testament.
Right.
So
Yeah,
understanding that we're called to be countercultural, but
yeah,
understanding what counterculture, Jesus sets the agenda for what countercultural looks like. Um, and if we as leaders can do that, men and women, if we as leaders can do that, that's what leaders do. They show the way. They show others how to
right.
do these things, and help to nurture that in others. Then that's when the church gets to change the world.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
we can have numbers, we're seeing declines in the West, but we can have numbers.
yeah,
Um, but if we have numbers and we have no kingdom, if we have numbers and we have no message, that's of no use at all. So yeah, so I'd rather there were 300 who understood radical empathy, who understood what it means to step into the shoes of others, and who had such a strong witness. I mean, that's how the early
yeah,
church
yeah,
did its work. People looked and said, "Wow, how did they manage to do that?
yeah.
How are they loving each other like that? How are they working that stuff out?" It's not they didn't have it; they also had the problems, but they were working it out. How are they
Power.
really doing this stuff? And that's what people were attracted to. And even when they were afraid to join the church, they joined, because it was like, whatever they've got, that's what I want. Right now, in this sort of crazy world, and sometimes a bit of a crazy church, we want to beat people up into that space. We want to tell them how to live the life, but we're not necessarily demonstrating what that life is. And we're sometimes trying to coerce people when our lives should persuade them,
You're
So
speaking all my love languages now. I'm like, yes and amen and mic drop. Our time is up, and I wish it wasn't, because I could talk to you forever. But I think what a place to end this, because ultimately, I think biblically, leadership is not about position, title, corner office. If we're called to follow Christ and to lead others in that way, to follow him. And that's why I want everyone to read Metamorph. You'll be hearing me talk a lot more about it, because I just think you get to the heart of it. And the reason I'm saying that is not just a pump factor. I'm really thinking about the church in the next 10 to 20 years, and I want so many more women to be stepping into their purpose. And but the fact is, there is a real enemy, and if we don't tend to these inner issues, we're just going to repeat the same patterns in a different way in the future.
Absolutely. One of the things I'm always saying to people, and particularly to women leaders and those who aspire, is that the devil is never going to help you with this, So if you've got buttons to press, he'll find them, and other people will find them. So if you can find them first, that will be good. And if you can learn from those who have found them, that would be good. And we all have that work to do. So women, men, whoever we are, if we're in a space of leadership, we will all have some kind of internal journey we need to make. And we can say yes to that, or we can try to perform and pretend it.
And it won't. Well, Kate, thank you. You are definitely coming back. I don't care if you want to or not.
I want to. I'd love to.
I hope you do. So thank you so much for joining me today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
Didn't I say that you're all going to love Kate? She is such an amazing woman and an incredible leader. Now, her details are listed and tagged in the description of this episode, because it would be great for you to keep up with her and connect further. And to you, our listeners, as always, I love and I appreciate and I value you so much. Thank you for joining us. I don't take your time for granted at all. So be sure to subscribe so you can never miss an episode, and share this with a friend that you want to encourage today. I'll see you back here next week.
Access more